Scripture this morning is taken from the Gospel according to John, the last of the Gospels in the New Testament to be written. John reminds us one of the key moments in the life of Jesus when he says to those who claim to follow him, "I give you a new commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. You also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." Let those of us who have ears to hear the message instead. Amen. I don't have any notes today because, among other things, the task that has been assigned me in this message is to bring together the experience of this weekend to some kind of meaningful conclusion with articulated views of what we've all experienced, which of course is an impossible task because the experience itself was so unique and individualized, so special to each individual participant, that no one of us could stand here and give you a summary of what was experienced and what was happened and how life was enhanced by the participation in it. So I'm going to try to put it in context, the context of Christian faith. And with apologies to those of you who participated in this retreat and who heard me say some of this already, I'll repeat some of the things that was said in that retreat at its beginning. But let me begin with this. At its essence, the message of the Christian faith, the good news, if you will, is that we live and move and have our being in the ground of being, the eternal source of being that we call God. And that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. If God is the eternal source of all that is and all that has been and all that will ever be, and we experience that creative source, that which brings to be reality as we know it, and that all that we know, even from a scientific point of view, participates in this great cosmos grounded in the creative force, then we are one with one another, in one another, beside one another, together with one another, in that from which none of us or any of creation can be separated. From a scientific point of view, from a physics point of view, the basic law is that energy is never lost. And that is to say that the energy that has come to be in these precious, unique individuals called people is never lost, and that not even, as the scriptures say, death can separate us from this love. So death, where is your sting? It's an amazing proclamation. It's an amazing statement of good news, and that's why it is called gospel, good news. Because generation after generation, indeed, century after century, people were taught that they lived their lives separate from God or the gods, that their way of being was flawed, that the gods had the power to condemn them, punish them, and declare to them continuously their sinfulness, their unworthiness, their inadequacy, so that no matter what their best efforts might be, They would always be distant and distinct from the gods, and would very likely suffer the punishment that their inadequacies have made them deserve. This is not unlike early Christian messages that said, God the Father Almighty is the Father in the sky who is both loving and fearful. And we, his children, if we will be good, that is, do exactly what God would have us do, we will be rewarded. We'll be allowed to stay with our Father. If we do not do what he wants us to do, and we break the rules, or the law, if you will, then we will be punished, and our punishment will be severe and eternal, everlasting. Now, I've often wondered what the good news in that is, and why in the world they would even begin to call it gospel good news. But for centuries, people have been able to do that with no sense of internal conflict, and I think that they've lost sight of the message. The message is simple. We have been given a gift and a demand, grounded in the reality that we live and move and have our being in God, and that nothing can separate us from the love of God. Hence, God is love, and those who live in love live in God. Notice the word in. Live in God, and God lives in, notice the word in, them. There is no separation. We live and move and have our being in God. And nothing can separate us from that love of God. Therefore, God is love, and those who live in love live in God, and God lives in them. I do not know how the church has for so long overlooked the word in. But the intimacy, the inclusion in the life of God that includes us all is the good news about life. And that means each one of you and every other person in all of reality is a precious part of God. And most of our lives we live blinded to that. There's another statement in this gospel, and that is that perfect love casts out fear. Notice that love does not stand over against evil. Love does not stand over against sin. Love stands over against fear. The arch enemy to love, so far as the Gospels are concerned, is fear. For fear holds us back. Fear pulls us into ourselves. Fear tries to break the connection that cannot be broken. But fear gives us the illusion that you, with whom I am one in God, are the enemy who stands over against me. And so I pull back into my safety and my self-protected attitude toward life. And I become fear-based and afraid to share myself openly, honestly, authentically. For fear that you will reject me, that you will judge me, that you will see me as inadequate, that you will see me as unacceptable. Perhaps it's because of my race, perhaps it's because of my gender, perhaps it's because of my national origin, perhaps it's because of my sexual orientation. But the fear is that you will find me unacceptable. And so I hold myself back from you, the one who in the great grounding in God cannot be separated from me. Now, what happened at the retreat is that we began to set fear aside and to share ourselves openly, honestly, authentically, without fear, without facade, without hesitation. And I don't mean to imply that everyone who went to retreat suddenly shared with everyone their deepest, darkest secrets and there was total self-disclosure and that there was nothing held back from anyone. I mean that we took a significant step toward knowing one another. And we began with reminding ourselves of Erich Fromm's 4 characteristic marks of a loving relationship. If we are to be a loving community, then we should know what it is to which we're committing ourselves. And no one has articulated this better than Fromm, so I'm going to borrow from Fromm. And again, forgive me, those of you who are there, to hear this a second time, but it's worth hearing a second time. Fromm says that there are 4 characteristic marks of a loving relationship. So just keep asking yourself while I'm laying these out. How much of this am I experiencing and how much of this am I not experiencing in my relationships? Just ask that. My relationships here in this church, my relationships in my home, my relationships with my family, my relationships with those I call my friends, my relationships with my neighbors. How much of this am I experiencing if I'm going to call myself a loving person? The first characteristic mark, says Fromm, is knowing. I cannot love one I do not know. We can talk about it, but in the existential sense, the real sense, the life sense, I cannot really love someone. I can care about someone I don't know. I can write a check and send it to some agency that's going to help people I'll never meet, but that's not love. That's caring. And he says, to know someone, I have to be truly interested in that person. Interested. Now ask yourself, how much do I allow myself to be truly interested in even the people in this congregation? We're not a large congregation. How much do I allow myself to be interested in the people in this congregation? And he reminds us that the word interested comes from the Latin inter esse, that I enter the essence of the other. In other words, I'm just not superficial with them. I'm really interested with them. I'm interested in them. In order to be interested in them, I have to listen to them. Hear their story. Take it into myself. Allow it to affect who I am. I have to be interested in them and listen to them. The second characteristic mark, says Fromm, is caring. Most of us think that when we're being caring, we're being loving. No, we're being caring. The story of the Good Samaritan, for example, is not a story of love. It's a story of caring. There's no evidence in that story that the Samaritan ever had a conversation with the person that he helped. There's no evidence in that story that the person who was beaten by the robbers and dumped in the ditch ever came to consciousness, ever knew the Samaritan, ever knew anything about the Samaritan. The Samaritan puts him on his beast of burden, takes him to the inn, tells the innkeeper, take care of him, and I will pay the bill. And if I still owe you money on my way back, I'll pay the rest of the bill. There's no evidence that those two, the victim and the Samaritan, ever had a word exchanged between them. It's a story of caring. And Jesus told the story, not in answer to the question, what is love? It was the question, who is my neighbor? And it was a story to say, anyone in need is your neighbor. So there's caring as a part of love, but not to be the totality of love. And by caring, Fromm means not simply that I do nice things for another person. That's a form of caring. But caring has more to do with a way of being than what we are doing. Caring is an attitude toward life that commits one to always and only seeking to be a beneficial presence in the life of another. Now think about that. To be a caring person means that I have committed myself at the deepest level of my being to intentionally seek to be a beneficial presence in the life of anyone I encounter, but especially a beneficial presence in the lives of anyone I claim to love. So there's knowing and there's caring. And then there's respecting. Now, Fromm means by the word respect, not simply that if someone of high rank, say the President of the United States, would walk into this room, that we would come to our feet and stand out of respect for the office of the presidency, regardless of who was president, we would stand. Or that the lieutenant would salute when the general walks in out of respect for the rank, even if he didn't think the general was a worthy human being. That's a kind of respect. What he means by respect, what the original word for respect means. The word for respect comes from the same Latin that gives us the word spectacles. It's a way of seeing. I spectacle you. I see you. And I see you as a person. Not as a thing, not as an object, but as a person. Most people in their lives literally do not see one another as persons. Here is a black man who happens to be a person. Or in my work with organizations, when we're dealing with managers, they'll say, she's a real problem to me. Not, this is a person with whom I'm having a problem being a good manager. She's a problem. Probably because she's female. Oh, and she happens to be a person. We lose sight of that. So he said, first we spectacle the other as a person. A person who happens to be white or black or brown, a person who happens to be male or female or transgender, a person who happens to be gay or straight, a person who happens to be rich or poor, a person who happens to be all these characteristic marks that we put at the first of the sentence and not the end. Even in the intimacy of marriage, we do not see our spouse as person often. It's particularly problematic for men. You know, the word to know, Erich Fromm's first word, knowing, is the same word in Hebrew for sexual intercourse. That's how intimate it is, to enter the essence of the other. You know, as a marriage counselor, I'm all the time trying to help, especially men, understand the difference between being a good sex partner and a lover. A sex partner knows what to do to the other. A lover knows how to be with the other. Lovers know what to do sexually. They know what to do. But it's an attitude of being with as opposed to doing to, so the other is not some object on which you are operating to gain some result that you want that makes you feel good about you. No, caring is, I am there intentionally to be a beneficial presence with and for the other. I spectacle the person. I see the person. And then Fromm says, you respect them. You see them a second time as the precious, unique person that only she or he is. If the Genome Project has proven anything, it is that every one of us, every one of you, is in fact the only you there is in the universe, even with an identical twin. Carol Smith is the only Carol Smith there is in the universe. Chuck Smith is the only Chuck Smith there is in the universe. And then Fromm reminds us there's nothing more precious than one of a kind. So I see you, not only as person, but as the precious, unique person that only you in the entire universe are. That's respect. And then finally, there is responding as opposed to reacting. Most of us react against what someone says. Someone says something to me, it frightens me, fear again, it frightens me, and so I react against it. How many people have ever said to you, just talk to the hand? Meaning, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I'm reacting. Or my sister's famous phrase when we were growing up was, oh yeah, what about you? Or her snappy comeback, takes one to know one. She was reacting to me. We were kids, and I probably was doing something that deserves a reaction. But the fact of the matter is, only in our maturity do we learn to be able to respond to one another. To really hear what the other says and to have, and this is what the word means, responsibility. The ability to respond. Most people think responsibility has to do with obligation. Obligation is something that's imposed on you from without. Responsibility is something that flows from you from within. We have the ability to respond. And I respond because in knowing you I have listened, and now I respond by standing under, the word understanding, standing under your experience, your thoughts, your perspectives, your attitudes. And because I'm willing to stand under your presentation to me rather than try to impose my presentation on you so that I win the argument in my reaction, I rather understand in my response. Because I have stood under your experience, your thoughts, your feelings, and because I have listened, I come full circle to now I know you more fully. Because I've stood under your experience, I'm able better to enter the essence of your life. And because I'm able to enter the essence of you, I'm better able to be caring with you, be a beneficial presence with you. And because I see you as someone with whom I'm able to be a beneficial presence, it is easier and easier to be respectful with you. And because I know you and care about you and respect you, it is now my way of being to stand under you and respond. Now that's what the essence of a loving relationship is all about. And out of that comes trust as opposed to distrust. Comes dialogue as opposed to argument or debate. Comes inclusion as opposed to exclusion and separation, and becomes the creative resolution of our issues as opposed to claiming, as opposed to blaming and complaint. Now, how much of our lives are lived not in trust but distrust, not in dialogue, standing under, but debate and argument? How much of our lives are lived in exclusion out of fear rather than inclusion out of celebration of your preciousness? And how much of our lives are lived with creative resolutions of our issues as opposed to complaints and blaming of the other? Now, back to the good news. The church is supposed to be different. This community is supposed to be different. We are supposed to be the ones who have moved with great commitment into the knowing and the caring and the respecting and the responding with one another. We're the ones who are supposed to have moved with great commitment into trust as opposed to distrust, into dialogue as opposed to debate, into acceptance as opposed to inclusion, as opposed to exclusion, and into resolution of issues as opposed to blaming and complaining. That's who we are meant to be, because we live and move consciously in the life of God that is love. And we know the truth is that those who live in love live in God and God lives in them. And we know that what we're really called to be, as the Scripture tells us, is to love one another as the commandment for our lives. Paul once said, the whole law is fulfilled in this one statement: love your neighbor as yourself. We are the ones who know that perfect love casts out fear, and we are the ones ready to proclaim that, not only in words, but in lives and deeds. And that is what began at this retreat. And any of you who participated have some sense of that. That's what this church is meant to be. Because that's what the church is meant to be. That's the life to which Jesus invited us. That's why he was so inclusive. That's why he could listen. That's why he was such a healer. That's why he was willing to stand up against injustice. That's why he would stand over against fear. That's why he could say to us, if you want to live your lives meaningfully, then love God who loves you, and love your neighbor who is a part of you. We've only just begun. But we're getting there. God bless you, precious people. Amen.